Welcome to the podcast. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Clem, and this is Turns Out We're Gay.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We are so excited to have the incredibly talented Hannah Malarski joining us today. Hannah is a writer, performer, comedian online and on stage, and an artist in her own form. Hannah is all about creating comedy and funny acts and stories and expressing herself for the queer community through her own experience or what she has come across in the sapphic world, and it is absolutely hilarious. Clem and I had the privilege of watching her show here in Sydney, and it was such a great time and we absolutely loved it. We have such a funny episode for everyone today. We're so excited for you to listen in. So welcome, Hannah.
I think it was like,
And
that's going to be the start of the podcast.
That's welcome, Hannah.
I was
Oh
like,
my
'cause
God.
do you guys have like a series of positions that you cycle through when you go to sleep? Like you might start with like spooning.
I missed the sleeping part of it. I thought you were just really casually like, do you guys have a cycle of sex positions you go
That
through?
you go through.
And I was like, I think we're pretty like just free with it. Just see what happens.
You don't have a system.
We go 1, 2, 3.
No, we're very organised. We are. No.
Well, did you go there or no?
I did.
Yeah, I was literally like, what is she?
Fair.
No.
Yes, but what we were talking about before was
Sorry to take it in that direction. You started
You
it.
actually did. Is that what you were thinking was going to happen when you pressed that button?
You started it with your little sound effect
No,
pack.
I can tell you now that is not what I thought was going to happen, but I'm really glad it did. Yeah. And welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, we got there eventually,
Yeah,
didn't
it's been a
we?
bit of a long time coming for the
Yeah.
listeners. Hannah was supposed to be on the first season. We went and watched one of their shows and loved it. Just timeline and schedule and things like that. Us going to Bali didn't help. So, yeah, when we were talking last, we were just started looking at properties, I think, for the studio and we're holding off on that as well. But it has finally come to it and we've finally got you in here and we're very excited.
So impressive. I think I was just like watching you in awe, just setting everything up. It's so fancy.
I love that.
Don't be like that.
It is very
Clem.
fancy. I will
It is
own
very
it.
fancy.
I'm going to own it.
Yeah.
Confidence.
Yeah.
It's not very DIY at all.
No.
Very fancy.
I think you've done a really good job.
Anyway, this episode's not about me.
Construction.
Take the compliment.
Thank you. Anyway, moving on. How we like to start these episodes for people that don't know you. Tell them who you are, a bit about yourself, what do you do, why are you here? No, I'm just kidding.
Why am I here on this earth? Oh, I could get really profound, guys. I'm Hannah Malarski. I am a writer and performer and I make the funnies. A lot of it is online, some of it is on stage. And I am here. Why am I here? I love your podcast. I love you guys. And yeah, I just want to be involved, I guess.
No, I love that. That was
Yeah.
a joke question, but
Was
I
it a
love
joke?
that you
Okay.
answered it.
Yeah, I just want to be near your auras.
No, I love that. Yeah, you connected in pretty early in the podcast stage and I remember sort of seeing it. And I think it was when we just started and, you know, we had friends and family or something. And then whenever someone sort of new followed and then you followed and I was like, oh my gosh, like a full-on comedian's followed us.
I remember the conversation vividly.
I know, I was very excited.
And
Really?
I actually remember laying in bed watching your videos and I was pissing
yeah.
myself laughing because we have very similar humor.
Very similar.
And I was laughing, like crying, laughing. I was like,
Really?
that's fucking hilarious.
Yes. I'm trying to think of which one it was. I think it was the one in the CBD, like the busking style one.
Lesbian preacher. Was it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that uncomfortable humor. Like, it's so good.
It was very uncomfortable that day. very uncomfortable.
I think it's so
Yeah.
funny. I loved it so
Aw.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I
You
remember
guys are the ideal audience. So I'm so honestly so chuffed. Yeah.
It was so
Yeah.
good. But yeah, I remember that. And you were like, look who's followed us. And I was like, oh, let's watch. And then we were watching it for ages and we're like, yeah, we need to get Hannah on. It'd be such a
Aw.
good chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And then we went and watched your show and we changed our mind. No, I'm just kidding. Cut it.
Awkward. Let's not talk about that.
No, we went and watched your show BDE in Sydney and had the best time. We were in hysterics. I was little bit terrified because I wasn't like, I've only really seen stand-up comedians and stuff, like as they pull in the crowd and stuff, and that's my worst nightmare. And I was sitting, do you remember where we were sitting? So there was like two sides and then there was the back row. And so the like alleyway of the stairs went up and then there was like one seat in the middle of the like gap and it was me. And I was like, she's also going to think it's really funny to be like, oh, Clem, like the podcast, like you'll love this. I would have fucking hated it. So there was a small part of me for the entire show was like, if there's an audience involvement part, I'm running.
You
But
don't
there
like
wasn't.
that?
I don't
Not
like
a fan. What is it about that? Just the...
I have very strong stage fright and just I don't love. It's ironic because lots of people think I do, but I really don't like attention. So
Really?
And she sat herself middle of audience for you and doesn't like attention.
a couple of things in my defense. I also don't like being trapped in seating. So it was like I could go to the bathroom if I needed to, but also I wasn't going to go to the bathroom in that scenario because I think someone did it. You called them out and I was like, well, if I needed to go, I'm not anymore.
Oh, yeah. Well, there wasn't really any safe
No,
space to
you
like
had to
crawl
kind of
out. Yeah.
pull it into the performance
No,
for
but
sure.
there was never going to be any audience interaction.
Well, I
in that
hadn't
show,
sort of come
fortunately.
across that kind of like way of performing comedy, so it was like really cool for me and much more relaxing.
like a
than,
more theatrical
yeah,
style.
like an actual kind of planned show type thing. Like I just always kind of thought of a comedian as like stand-up comedy or whatnot. I didn't really think about it in the theatre sort of planned show thing, and it was really cool. I really liked it.
It was so good. I was laughing the whole time.
Oh, nice.
And what I actually loved about it, because I haven't really been in the queer community long. I've been queer for a while, but haven't been in the queer community long. But I really enjoyed the environment that was built around it and the people in the audience. And then watching your show, everything that was happening, I was like, oh my God, that's me. That's me. The one where you're dancing for your partner, that was me. Yeah, we had a good laugh about like every single story that you were bringing out, even though it was comedy, I was like, am I just funny? Like,
I know you are.
Interestingly, doesn't quite deliver it as well as a comedian, but
no, definitely not. But I was like, I just felt it was really validating, even though it was comedy, it was validating and it was a really queer experience. And I haven't had many of those experiences because I've lived in rural towns and all sorts of things. So it was just super fun. And I remember walking away from it being like, I'm gay. Like, I'm super gay. This is fun.
Brilliant. That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I come from a theatre background, so that's why I think there was that whole. Have you heard of the idea of the fourth wall? That there's this imaginary wall in front of you and the audience, so you don't see the audience. They can see you, but you don't acknowledge their existence. But whereas with a lot of stand-up, the audience is there in the room with you, and they can become part of the show. But I was way too nervous to like bring in elements of improv because it was my first show in like 8.5 years. So I was like, there was going to be no audience interaction. But the wild thing was, we performed it twice in Melbourne and once for that Sydney season. And the Sydney audiences, I didn't expect them to be so wild. Like they were so receptive. They were like talking during it. They were like, "Oh my God!" like they were throwing me, and it was incredible. Like I would expect Sydney audiences to be more reserved, but it was just wild.
Yeah.
Like they got so into it, and I don't know whether it was the space or I don't know. Yeah, such a great audience.
I think like definitely the space. It was at Qtopia, which is a really cool. Is it a foundation or?
It's like a centre of queer history, but they always do. They also do events as well, and they have a theatre space.
Yeah, so it was such a cool space. It was quite intimate, and it honestly felt like you were just sitting with like a bunch of your friends kind of thing. Like even though there was a fair few of us in there, like it was like a really comfortable, welcoming environment, which is obviously, you know, the crowd is your sort of audience is the community, and that is naturally quite inclusive and stuff. You know, people were all like shouting things and getting involved and stuff, and we loved it. We were here for it.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. I think it was just like, it wasn't just the energy that you brought, it was like the energy that came back to you. And it was just so, it was so funny. I loved it.
It was an incredible experience for me as well. Like there was a girl who I didn't know. She came up to me afterwards and she was like, during the dance scene, I just started woofing. She was like, woof, woof. Like,
Oh my God.
Literally-
Was that it out? I think I heard that.
did you hear that?
Yes.
Never met her in my life.
Love it.
She just started woofing. Like she was just getting into it. So yeah, it was.
I'm not surprised. I don't remember that, but it could have very well been us because that section of the show was quite possibly the biggest highlight. We loved that.
Yeah.
Thank God, because we spent so many weeks working on that dance.
Yeah, actually,
my God,
Ash
it
did
was so
mention
good.
that there was a
Yeah.
couple of little kerfuffles in the arrangement.
Oh, we had so many arguments because I wanted to do it by feel and they wanted to do it by count, but we wouldn't compute with my brain. So they would go,
see.
right, in 4 counts, we'll do a spin. And I'll be like, can't I just like feel the music? And it was,
It looked so natural. Was that in the, so that was in the, there's like a segment where you're at a bar and it's like the femme masky kind of like vibe. Oh my gosh, it was so funny.
Yeah, it just hit the nail on the head in terms of like being relatable as well, which is, it's hard, obviously, being in a minority of some sort and having, you know, little representation and things like that. When you go and see something like this and have it be so relatable, it like hits different, I think, because like you just don't get that from a lot of other things that we watch.
And that's really what I took away from it, was how relatable it was, even though it was comedy. It was super relatable. So,
You did well, basically.
did.
Aw,
We've just spent the last 10 minutes
That's
telling
literally, that was my whole
Yeah.
intention with the show, was it was for a queer audience. And
I can't believe that it was your first show in 8-9 years. You honestly like look like seasoned pro. Like
Oh, thanks.
I would have never
Yeah.
guessed that at all.
Oh, really? Thank you.
No.
Yeah, I felt real rusty. I mean, that was the 3rd season of the show, so maybe I'd blown out a few of the cobwebs, but yeah. And the other thing that happened, like when I first started performing the show, and I think some people say this, is that when you're on stage, like 30% of your brain capacity disappears. So it can be like, I remember stepping out for the first show that I'd done in 8.5 years and just, you know, it's so nerve-wracking. Yeah.
My stomach just dropped.
Uh,
Imagining that. I was
Sorry,
like,
I didn't need to give you that image, but like, yeah, I just, I think also maybe I'd slightly over-prepared as well. So, yeah.
yeah, we've been
But
there
hey.
before, haven't we, when we've over-prepared.
Yeah, we're very much like you in the sense of like go with the feel of something. We planned one episode once, like really detailed.
Oh, we were preparing an episode. We overly prepared an episode, which
Yeah.
was weird because it was a U-Haul ghosting episode, which you shouldn't have
What?
to prepare for.
No, because we wanted to. So we try our best. Like we're not an educational podcast, but we try our best if there's terms that we're throwing in there to give a bit of a backstory or like a definition or whatnot. So we tried to do that, and then we're like, oh, let's throw in some statistics for something. I can't remember what it was, but it was such a shit show.
Yeah.
It was such a shit show. I think we nearly killed each other that day. It's one of the only times we've ever fought.
Yeah.
Like not a proper fight, but like actually been annoyed.
Yeah.
And I was like, we were just like, let's just do it.
Yeah. Yeah. We did the whole episode just furious at each other because we could not get
And
it
it was
right.
one of the best episodes, so maybe people love that like tension.
Could you see that in the recording?
I don't
Or your
think so.
faces?
I think you did a short of us being like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah. Well, I think actually once we started, it was like kind of broke the ice of that tension of that like sort of moment before, because we were
Yeah.
just looking at each other like, what the fuck is wrong with us
Yeah,
right now? We
yeah.
can't do this at all.
Yeah. But I've been a performer too from a dancing world, not comedy. I don't think I think they would laugh at me, not with me. So that's the difference.
Aw.
But that's okay. I'm happy to be laughed at. That's no worries. But I know what you mean when you step on stage and you've like prepared and you've been training for months and you're like ready to go, and then you get on stage and you're like, I don't remember what I'm here for. Why am I here? Like, what am I here to do? So I totally understand that completely. One thing you talked about in the show was a bit of your coming out story. And I remember a story about, I think, an ex-girlfriend, was it? And
Was it catfishing?
yeah,
It was a catfishing tale. Yeah.
But maybe before we get into that,
Oh, yeah.
why don't we talk a little bit about your coming out story? We've done a bit of content before this, and it's quite an interesting story. So why don't we go through that for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I had described it as like a bit of a multi-stage journey. 'Cause often when you get to the moment of coming out, it's like really the tip of the iceberg. And I was just explaining how sort of growing up, I had crushes on girls, but I didn't know that they were crushes. And I also had no concept of what a lesbian was. Growing up, I didn't really have any role models or anything like that. And so I always had this sense that there was something off about me or something not quite right. And I was a bit of a tomboy growing up. And when someone came out and actually, told me that I was a tomboy, it felt like this accusation that there was something really wrong with me, and it was an acknowledgement that there was something wrong with me. And then I started to, guys might be familiar with this, the masking behaviors and throwing up little shields, and I wasn't fully aware that I was doing this at the time, but starting to dress more feminine. I think I talked about this as putting on a little blue sarong.
Oh my gosh,
and Christmas earrings.
Yeah.
My mum's lippy, excuse I. Yeah. Like high to femininity during the early 2000s. But and I was pretty good at masking, I think. And also, funnily enough, the comedy thing. Like I never knew that I could make people laugh until year 7. And then it became another awesome shield. Like it just was such a great way of getting the attention, weirdly enough, away from my identity. Because if people were laughing, they're sort of, I don't know, their focus was like elsewhere. But also a bit of a weapon because it just felt like a really effective shield, I think, comedy. I think it probably mostly is for a lot of comedians and performers. It's a bit of a shield, or it starts out as a bit of a shield. And then when I was 17, I had this realization that I was gay. And I remember thinking, I am never going to meet anyone. I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. I'm never going to have children. I just couldn't imagine a life path beyond the age of 17. And I remember just like getting quite distressed and then just all of a sudden kind of just swallowing it, just having this instinct to swallow it. And then I continued on, and out of the blue, I went to university, and one of my crushes was finally reciprocated, and I got myself a girlfriend. Yeah. And I came out as bisexual because that felt the safest thing to do. But I remember when I was with that person, my ex, there were moments where I really wanted to tell them that I was gay, but I was just so terrified for some reason. And I think I just wasn't ready within myself to accept that that's what I was. And it was just this, like, I can't even explain. It was just such a deep terror.
Yeah.
And that is wrapped up in another story, which is the catfishing thing. Do you want to hear the shortened version? Or do you want to save that one, or maybe just not at all?
I feel like we definitely need to touch on the catfishing. We'll get a short version so that the listeners have to go and watch you live, because I think it's a crucial part of any show you do, quite frankly. It's a very entertaining story. But just before we get to that, let's talk a bit more about how then you navigated going, I guess, from identifying or coming out as bi to then coming out as a lesbian.
So I was bisexual for the length of that relationship, and that felt quite safe to me, which doesn't always feel that way for everyone I know. And then we broke up, and then I moved to Sydney to study, and I was just not in a good place. And I didn't have many sort of close friends in Sydney, and this breakup has just like completely sapped me of energy. And then I remember having this one-on-one conversation with my playwriting teacher, and she's just this like hilarious, bolshy, like British woman. She's so, brilliant. And she was just like out of the blue, now you're gay, right? And I was like, no one had ever asked me that question explicitly. And I took myself completely by surprise. I was like, yeah. And that was it. That was my coming out. I hadn't planned it. But in that moment, I was like, yeah, I'm gay and I'm okay with it. And so I got to live out this almost kind of fantasy / reality where I was gay and I was comfortable and I was okay with it. And then that sort of escalated the journey of me then coming out to my family, who were very like, yep, what of it? So all this fear and all this build-up was, I wouldn't say it was for nothing. I think a lot of the fear that I had about coming out was how I would cope with that knowledge, or whether I was psychologically ready to accept that reality. And I really think I wasn't. I think it was just too much for me. Yeah.
I agree, and I had a really similar story where I came out as bi for a while, but I knew I wasn't, but I was scared of the actual truth behind it. How do I say this? But I know from speaking to people who are bi and they are really confident with being bi, I know for them there is that kind of connotation, I guess, of people who go to bisexuality and then they kind of know they're queer, and it's, and I think that's sometimes why it's a bit challenging for them to be like, no, but I am bi and that's just who I am. But I think for me it was a bit of a safety thing too, but it was a fear of how people would see me, and I don't know why I cared so much, but I did care so much about, but if I stay as bi then people will be more comfortable with it. But the second I said that I was gay, I was like, I'm gay, like I'm really gay. But it was like an awakening moment. So I can completely understand where you're coming from that, and just the fear behind it. And then when you finally say it, it's like a huge release, right? Like you had a similar experience as well.
Yeah, mine was quite different because I was sort of ending a very long relationship and an engagement and all that. So it was extremely hard and sad, but it was the biggest relief I've ever felt, was saying that. And I was the same sort of boat of like a very long internal battle. It's always very interesting because I think you hear a lot about people that have negative interactions with family and friends and a negative interaction from the world about being queer or coming out, but not so often you hear the side of my biggest battle was myself, which is what I really related to when you sort of talk about that in your shows and stuff like that. So I think it's a really, important story to share. And I think the way that you do it is a really good way of doing it without being too like heavy and, making light of it and stuff like that. So,
Aw, thank you.
actually, there was one thing that you said before about before you came out and things, and when you kind of knew but you weren't willing to accept it, you used comedy to try and distract people almost from it. Whereas now I would say your comedy is centered around your sexuality and your, the way you live your life and things like that. What kind of was the turning point for that, and why do you use those topics?
So growing up, it was more of like just an instinctual thing. It wasn't till uni when you're actually sort of forced to like reflect in a critical way about yourself and why you do things, and et cetera, that I realized that comedy can be quite a profound tool. Like it's not just silly, it's not just jokes, it's not just frivolous. It can be used to tell the truth, sort of quite sneaky in a way that it gets past people's defenses and can really get people listening without realizing that they are. So it's quite I see comedy differently now. I see it as like I almost have a responsibility. I take that responsibility quite seriously, because I think when you can make people laugh, when you have that ability, and I think most people have that ability, it's a power that you can have over people. So I want to use that to empower myself as a queer person, but also to empower the queer community. Comedy can be a really effective way at addressing power imbalances, and there's so much that comedy can do. But the sort of angle that I took with this show was that where I started was I had three things. Number one, I had the show title, because I loved the show title, because I registered the show before I wrote it. So I registered for Melbourne Fringe Festival, and so I just had to register a show concept. The second one was I wanted to tell the truth, and I always feel that comedy is such a great tool to tell the truth. I can't remember. I think the third thing was like I want it to be funny and I want it to be entertaining. But yeah, comedy is, can be really profound.
I love that you kind of took it as something that you used to sort of hide your true self to now helping others, accept and relate to in their struggles with their true identity and things. And I think it's also the way you do it. It's very easy to relate, even if it's not in a direct relation. Like, it might not be that they identify the same way as you. It might be that it's a gender identity issue, but just the battles that you have, I think, are very transferable in a lot of different queer struggles. So I really love that. And I haven't forgotten about the catfish story, but I'm thinking what we'll do is we'll leave the catfish story till last so people have to stay and listen to the whole episode, which I think they will naturally, but there's a little teaser anyway. But you did mention the title, which I said before, and I said it on purpose, BDE, because
sorry.
Yeah,
No.
good slide in though, because I was about to ask this question. So you go
Do
right ahead. No, you go. You go.
No, so I'm happy to, we'll say the word, but I said it particularly because BDE is what you ended up having to sort of use on things, because there was quite a little bit of drama around that with, social channels and things like that. We won't, say what social channels or whatever, but yeah, so you had an issue with the word dyke.
I did.
Show was Big Dyke Energy, and that caused a lot of problems with you for socials. So what happened there? Talk to us about that.
It caused problems. It was like towards the final season, all of a sudden, I started getting posts deleted and pulled because of offensive hate speech, essentially. And I was a bit puzzled, because basically the word dyke has obviously been used as a slur, but it's also historically been used as a term of empowerment. And there's so many people who use that word, like dykes on bikes. There's also dykes on mics, and there's like Dyke beer and all of these different brands that have reclaimed the word. And if you were to start pulling this, posts down and taking away their platform, like that would be quite disastrous, like for like our community. The way that we've shaped language and language has evolved, we understand that, but for some reason it just wasn't, that nuance. The filters weren't able to pick up on that. So my posts kept getting taken down, and my account was also under threat of being deleted as well. So that was really frustrating, because I couldn't talk to anyone. There was no routes to addressing the issue at all. And it meant that I was making this show about, visibility, lesbian visibility, and then the show itself was being erased off social media. So it was kind of this really frustrating irony, because that was the main way that I was selling the show and was able to repay this, enormous amount of money that, me and my partner had invested in the show. So it was really quite scary. It was. It was just made me feel really powerless and worried for what that would mean for so many other people as well.
We're also seeing this just in general when we are talking on socials. We have to be so mindful of what we say, what words we use, how it's written. We've had a few things flagged just for using the word lesbian or queer. Lesbian gets flagged a lot on content. Lesbian, yeah. Or sexuality, that's another word that gets flagged a lot. But I think you're right. I think it has to do with the filters being still not updated, or there's just so much hate of these words being used that social media is not, I guess, new aged enough to update as we're updating. And I feel like these words are, well, from my experience anyway, are only being used from what I've seen in a positive way. And that might be because of my narrative and how I've built my FYP brick by brick. But it's sad to think that it's being used so much hatefully that's why it's being taken away. And it's horrible because, like you said, you're using it to promote such a positive thing. But yeah, it's unfortunately happening quite a lot, hey?
Yeah, it's very frustrating. And like you said, it's so ironic because it's like it's something that you're trying to reclaim and our community has reclaimed and trying to use it, the word for good and for good intentions and to bring visibility and whatnot, and you quite literally getting that visibility stripped away from you. And Well, it is. Like, they're taking it down, saying that it's hate speech, but they're literally discriminating you by doing so,
Yeah.
in a sense. So, I remember seeing that and just thinking that is so ridiculous.
Yeah, we had a whole conversation about it. You showed me, and it was disappointing to see that it's even happening. But we've experienced it on some of the most important things that we're posting, and to break that barrier, and then it's being flagged, and it's super frustrating. So, social media websites, if you could just get your shit together, that would
Honestly, and just get some sort of communication channel, because that is one thing that everyone says. It's like people's livelihoods are literally on social media, and they can't do anything when something like this happens. But
Well, yeah, we're creating all the value on social media,
exactly.
Yeah, it's super frustrating.
Yeah. What does that mean for the show? Obviously, the show's now wrapped up, right? And so the next show, you won't be using that word again, or you're going to try and push your luck?
I'm not sure. There's potentially another title in there that could be a bit, could either bite me on the ass or could prove a point. If I decided to use the D word again, I would potentially have to filter it out, and that might, Not sure about that one. Not sure if that's a battle I want to fight again, but maybe. There's a part of me that's like, I want to get back on the horse and be a bit of a pest.
I could see Clem's face. And Clem's
You want me to?
Clem's like, do it.
Well, as you asked it, I was watching Hannah's face, and obviously this is a podcast and people can't really see that, but Hannah's face was sort of scheming straight away, and I was like, interesting. This is my path that I would take. Would be like, wanna fuck them all. I'm gonna do it, but no, I understand. Like, it's definitely like a balancing act of, obviously, like, this is what you do, and this, like you say, you need to get return back on the investment that you put in, and this is how you promote it and stuff like that. So it's like a balancing act of, like, how much do you want to sort of risk that? Then also, is it going to help with visibility and maybe change the narrative a bit on that, topic, and that if we keep doing these things, maybe they'll eventually listen and stuff like that. But it's one of those constant battles in a lot of, concepts in the queer world, that people sort of have to do the balancing act of risk versus reward and worth it or not and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's a battle that we're facing too, and it's a constant conversation. I think, unfortunately, social media is not going anywhere. Well, not unfortunately, fortunately, we don't want it to go anywhere. But yeah, it's an ongoing battle, so hopefully things change.
We'll share it though.
Go to the show. It's definitely worth it. I was actually about to ask you before, and then you kind of answered the question about how do you come up with your concepts. But I loved that thought process around telling the truth, and that's exactly how I felt. I felt like I was learning so much about you, and like, you're telling your truth, but you're doing it through comedy. But is there anything else that you do to come up with these concepts? And I think there was one actually about Mother Earth.
Oh, yes, Mother Nature.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love how straight away she gets into character.
Mother Nature.
How did you come up? Wait, where did that come from? Because we were both sitting there like, this is so interesting. Where does this come from? How do you come up with these ideas?
So a lot of the stuff I do is sketches, it's sketch work, but a lot of it is satirical sketch. So a lot of it's like making a point about something, either something that I find unusual about our culture that we accept as being normal, or it's something that irritates me, or it's an injustice of some form. For example, that started out as a separate concept that I kind of rolled into the show, because you'll notice the show kind of shifts between different tones and different weird ideas.
Yeah.
It's because it actually started out as those things standing alongside each other, and then I found those connections to connect them all together after a period of trying to figure it out. But that particular sketch is, so basically it's if Mother Nature became a capitalist and started charging people for her products and services. So started charging us for oxygen. And of course she'd be South African. She'd be a boss bitch. And that's probably way off my accent. But yeah, what would happen if we put a dollar value on the things that are so valuable to our survival? What would happen? How would we start to see them? And how would that change our perspective on everything else that we've put a dollar value on? So that started out as like me making a satirical point that so many of the things that are most valuable in the world don't have a price tag on it, but they're the most valuable things. And I think that money does this thing where it kind of hypnotizes us and forces us, makes us look at the expensive, shiny things that have the price tags, whereas we're not looking at the things that are truly valuable, like, for instance, creativity, like our attention spans. Like, we have a limited attention spans. And I remember this guy saying on a podcast that at the end of your life, what do you remember? You remember the sum total of all the things that you paid attention to. So you have limited and finite attention. You know, it's your bonds with others. Those are the most powerful things. But it's, you know, mothers don't get paid for all of the value that they provide. You know, most of the things that are most valuable in this world don't have a price tag. But if we suddenly put a price tag on them, we'd be like, oh, whoa, all these other things are crap.
Yeah.
Like, they're just absolute worthless rubbish. It's literal trash. So yeah, that was the point. That was the original idea for that sketch, because I think a lot of the stuff that I do is satirical. It's making a point about culture or society, or, you know, making fun of people in authority. Yeah.
I really liked it, and it took me a second to get my head around it, but then when I did, I was like, oh, you're so right. Like, that actually makes a lot of sense. And I loved the South African boss bitch energy.
I just love the South African accent.
100%.
The accent is just so good.
It was so entertaining.
It
But
was.
it's exactly how you said, like, with comedy and being a good comedian, you were able to get such a, you know, strong thought process to start in our brains, but do it so effortlessly and like kind of sneak your way in, because we're like, oh, look at this funny accent, like, this is so good, like, whatever, like, and then you just suddenly like start being like, oh shit, like, actually that's such a good point and I've never thought about it, type thing. And I love also that you pull from your life experiences and you tell the truth. And you told a lot of truth that night and opened up about a lot of things that have happened to you in your time on this earth. And one thing that we mentioned earlier in the episode, and we've teased a little bit about it, but I think we'll sort of wrap it up with the catfish story, and just a taster sort of length for the listeners to hopefully then follow you along and find out more of the stories. But tell us a bit about how that time you were a catfish.
I was a catfish. Bloop, bloop. Okay. Do I want to? I'm like, how much do I want to tell? This is a tricky one. Okay, I'll do like a shortened version of it. So basically, was in a relationship with my ex for 2.5 years, and when we first met, when we weren't quite in a relationship yet, there was a night where basically a bunch of girls from our uni course were together having a great time, and then all of a sudden somebody turns around and is like, "So who here slept with a boy? And if so, how many?" And like, everyone literally turned to me and I just felt this like heat on me, and I was just like, you know, I'd not slept with anyone, and I thought that in this moment that would be the thing that would out me. And so I was like, 7. And I was like, whoa, Hannah. In my head I was like, geez, that's too many. But everyone else was like, oh my God, who is this master? And like, it just, again, it was another one of those like shields that I just threw up and protected me essentially. But I immediately regretted it. So I really wanted to tell her the truth, but I couldn't. And whenever it came to it, I felt so terrified that it would out me. And like I said, I wasn't really ready, because that would have been like, why did you make that up? Clearly there's something wrong with you, you know. And I never told them in our relationship. And then a couple of years later, I saw them on this forum called Sapphic Sydney. And I just started talking to them, and it led to me seeding that I was this other person. My name was Jessica Peck. It was just such a lazy name. It was just like, whatever. Like, are we doing this? Are we? Yep. Okay. And I just created a profile and added her, and was shocked that I actually was able to have a real conversation with her and learnt a lot of like personal details and stuff, and that she missed me. And obviously that satisfied a part of my brain. I was like, oh, misses me. That's great. And then after that, I deleted the account and forgot about it. And then about 6 months later, I ran into her in a pub and I was like, well, I didn't say at the same time that was the year of like the truth-telling purge. I decided to come out and I was like, right, I'm going to come out to her. Like I'm going to tell her, it just felt like serendipity. And then I was in the pub and I was like, so I'm gay. And she's like, yeah, I knew that. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm gay, yeah. And then later on in the conversation, I was like, I don't know what happened. It was like this like another part of me took over. It was like I was being possessed, and I just was like I just had to get it out. I was just like, that time that I told you I slept with 7 boys? Yeah, that was a lie. I'd never slept with anyone at all. And she was obviously upset by that. And then after that, we carried on talking. It was actually really nice to reconnect. And then all of a sudden I started talking about this girl called Jessica Peck. I don't know what came over me. I just started like adding in like little details from the conversation. I was like, and she started looking at me weirdly, like I was like, just saying things that Jessica Peck would have said. And then I just ran to the toilet and I had this real movie moment when I was looking in the mirror and I was like, you have like 2 options. You either tell her tonight or you take it to your grave. And I like felt sick and I just like ran out and I was like, it was me. I'm Jessica Peck. That was me. And so she was understandably very upset and felt violated, and that's totally fair, totally reasonable. And I just felt like such deep shame about what I'd done, and also had no idea why I decided to tell her this story. Like, what was the purpose of this? Like, I probably should have held on to. Why did I tell her? And I remember I didn't talk to anyone for a couple of days after that. Because I was like, I'm such a bad person. Like, who would do this? Like, obviously it was the wrong thing to do. And then I told my sister because I was like, oh, I've had enough. Like, I've had enough of this shame. And I told my sister and I got to the end and she pissed herself laughing. And I was like, oh, what? And she was like, Hannah, this is the most embarrassing but hilarious thing I've ever heard. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I think she told me something that she'd been ashamed of. And we connected over that feeling of like, oh, we've both done shit things. We've both, made mistakes. And obviously that doesn't excuse me from what I did. But that ended up being a sort of core message of the show was accepting every part of you and loving every part of you and just, being an actual human being and seeing that represented in the queer community. That ended up being the sort of the message of the whole show, which is, we're all shitheads. We're not perfect. But you don't have to be perfect to be gay. And I think I always felt that I had to be, a shining example of a human being, and I had to be beyond reproach and have a clean record in order to be worthy of love. And I was just like, you know what? I did a shitty thing. Like, that was a shitty thing to do, but here it is out there. I'm not saying it's not incredibly complicated. In the end of the day, straight people can be shitheads too, and we're all worthy of love. Yeah.
I
was
laughed
incredibly long. Sorry.
I laughed so much at that story, but it actually sat with me for a few days. Because I know that sounds wild, but I started reflecting, being like, what's something that I've done that I could admit to? And I'm not ready to do that on this podcast. But I think your story is relatable. I'm sure there's a listener listening to this that's like, oh, fuck, I've been Jessica Peck before. I've definitely done that. And yeah, I think it's just great to come to it and you owned it. And I think you probably feel better admitting to it to your ex and having that purge and walking away from it, or you don't and you could have taken it to your grave.
I really could have, and I actually struggled whether to put it in the show as well, the ethics of having a story with someone else in it, but hopefully I tried to take as much of her out of the story and as much personal details that she gave, and to make it centered around my decision and the fact that I am accountable. I'm not trying to paint myself as a hero. You know, I'm trying to paint the story with as much sort of complexity as possible and take private information about her out of it. And I hope that I did that successfully, because I wouldn't want, you know, to include, again, that sort of whole thing of like, you have this power and the platform to tell a story, and I hope that I'm responsible with that.
Yeah. I think you were, because what I took away from it is how could I then really think about things that I've done that I could speak to or relate to, or be like, actually, yeah, I've been Jessica Peck before. Not, I might have been. Let me think about it. But I don't know. What I took away from it was, you know, be accountable for what you've done and be honest. And yeah.
Thank you.
That's a funny take. And it's funny how you said half the audience, because I was not in that half. I definitely didn't go and reflect, and I probably should have. I don't know. But for me, it was more of like, wow, okay, this person's being really brave and really raw and putting themselves in a really vulnerable position. And it just, not that I had any sort of like reservations or anything, but when you did that, I guess I kind of like fully opened up to everything you were doing and being like, fuck, I have a lot of respect for that kind of thing. It almost made me relax in being like, this person's being really authentic and honest and true. And then I reckon all of the stuff you did after that, or even before that, really hit even more so. And I was way more open to the messages and the, you know, the deeper messages inside all of your sort of comedy and stuff like that. So for me, it was just like, it's a brave thing to do, to own up to something, not only in that situation. I don't know how you did it to the girl, but to a whole audience and now a whole podcast. But it is true. We all do shit that we're ashamed of and have moments that we make mistakes and whatnot. And to be honest, like you did the right thing. You went and owned up to it, to the person, and you've learnt from it and stuff like that. But we all had a giggle.
But part of it is also releasing yourself from past versions of yourself. And
100%.
It was not something I would do today, because I know how it feels. And I know how it feels to carry shame around for years and years and years. And so, like, it's releasing yourself, your past self, and going, yeah, it's a decision that I made in the past, but I don't want to, you know, that's not something I would do today. So, yeah.
What a great message, though.
That is, it's really cool.
That is a really good message. So what is next? What have you got coming up? What are you planning? Tell us all the gossip, but also keep some for secrets.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Be mysterious still. Okay.
Tell us it all.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been, in a little bit of hibernation. I've been off social media. I don't know if you probably haven't noticed.
I have, actually. Yeah.
We're your biggest fans, we've noticed.
Yeah.
Oh,
We're in the front row. You just don't
Thank
see
you.
us. We're in disguises.
I've been off social media for a bit, but I'm figuring out a way to sort of get back on that feels healthy for me, because I think I don't know, we just all seem to go through cycles with social media where your usage gets a bit problematic, and that's what had happened during the show. I was sort of like a little bit too obsessive on there. So but I still think social media is such a powerful tool. So we'll be getting back online, so to speak, working on the next show at the moment. And I have about 4 weeks till I have to register for Melbourne Comedy Festival. So it'll be a similar deal. Got to come up with a concept for a show, but I've got, the same thing. I've got like a lot of ideas, and I don't have the same ace up my sleeve of a catfishing tale. But
I'm sure you've got a couple more up there.
Yeah, there might be something. Yeah. So just making work, making more stuff, and releasing it on the social medias, and
on the social media website.
On the social media website .net.au.
God. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so glad we finally got to sit down with you, and I will link all of your socials in the description. We'll share everything on our social media websites. So go and give Hannah a follow. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on?
No, you pretty much covered it. We're we're very grateful, and we love what you're doing, and we're going to continue to be your biggest cheerleaders.
Yeah. Aww.
Yes.
Me too, you guys.
Yeah. Yes.
Aw.
Make sure you go to a show. If you see a show, you better go.
Aw, thank you.
Perfect. All right, we wrap up
Yeah.
each episode with love you, bye. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3.
Love you, bye.